All right, listen up. I need to tell you about what went down yesterday on Fox Sports, because it was legitimately one of the most comprehensive and strategically fascinating draft preparation discussions I've seen all season long. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that Colin Cowherd, Nick Wright, Emmanuel Acho, and the entire panel spent nearly 3 hours going position by position through Mel Kiper's recently released 2026 NFL Draft Big Board, specifically identifying which players make the most sense for the San Francisco 49ers based on their current roster, construction needs, and future timeline considerations. And the way they broke down everything from offensive line depth concerns, with Trent Williams approaching 38 years old, to wide receiver needs, if they move on from Brandon Ayuk, to defensive line reinforcements, with Nick Bosa and Mike Williams' futures uncertain, to safety depth behind the starters, had everyone in the studio completely engrossed. Because this isn't just some generic mock draft exercise where you throw names at a board. This is about the 49ers intelligently using the 2026 draft to address glaring weaknesses while also positioning themselves for sustained contention over the next 5 to 7 years, as they potentially transition away from some veteran cornerstones who've defined this roster for the better part of a decade. Hey, what's up everyone? Real quick before we get into everything, that like button is literally what determines if this reaches hundreds or thousands of fans. Takes 1 second, but makes a huge impact on the channel's growth. Just smash that like button right now. It's the easiest thing you can do, but honestly the biggest way to support this content. Every single like pushes this further. So hit it now. So Fox Sports opens, and Colin Cowherd has this analytical intensity on his face, like he's about to facilitate a masterclass in draft evaluation and roster construction philosophy. And he immediately sets the context by explaining that yes, the 49ers are on their bye week, but that doesn't mean the football analysis stops, because smart organizations are already thinking months ahead about how they're going to use the draft to address weaknesses and add young talent on cheap rookie contracts. And Cowherd frames the entire discussion by first establishing what San Francisco's most pressing needs are heading into the 2026 draft. And he starts with the offensive line, which he argues might be the most urgent concern given that Trent Williams is 37 years old, and while he's still playing at an elite level after a slow start to this season, Father Time is undefeated, and you can't bank on a left tackle in his late 30s maintaining Pro Bowl production indefinitely. And Cowherd points out that at left guard, the 49ers don't really have a long-term solution currently on the roster. And at center, Jake Brendel is also an older player where you could potentially stand for an upgrade. So basically, the entire left side of that offensive line has significant question marks moving forward, even though the right side seems set, with Dominic Pooney going into year 3 of his rookie deal, and Colton McKivitz, who signed that 3-year, $45 million extension, and Nick Wright, who's always been incredibly analytical about draft strategy and how teams should balance immediate needs versus best player available jumps, in talking about wide receiver being another massive need for San Francisco. And Wright explains that he genuinely believes the 49ers are going to move on from Brandon Ayuk this offseason, which would clear about $25 million in cap space that could be reallocated elsewhere. And on top of that, Jawan Jennings is going to be a free agent. So there's real uncertainty about whether they can afford to keep him given all their other financial commitments. And Wright makes this point that even if they do retain Jennings, you still need to add another legitimate receiving threat through the draft, because Deebo Samuel is also getting older and has dealt with injuries throughout his career. So having multiple young receivers on rookie contracts who can contribute immediately while also representing the future of that position group is absolutely critical for offensive sustainability, especially in Kyle Shanahan's system that relies so heavily on pre-snap motion and route concepts that require intelligent receivers who understand leverage and spacing. But then, Emmanuel Acho steers the conversation toward the defensive line, which he argues might actually be the most important area to address in this draft. And Acho talks about how we don't know what the futures of Nick Bosa or Mike Williams are going to look like with this team next year, whether that's due to contract situations or injuries, or just organizational decisions about allocation of resources. And Acho makes this observation that while guys like Keon White, who's under contract next year, and Clelin Ferrell, who Acho hopes they keep around as a depth piece, have shown flashes, the 49ers frankly lack the kind of elite edge rushing horses up front that championship defenses require. And this draft class is supposedly shaping up to be really strong along the defensive line, with multiple first and second round talents who could come in and contribute immediately. And Acho emphasizes that at linebacker, outside of Fred Warner, who's obviously a generational talent, you have major question marks. He mentions Nick Martin as someone he likes the future of, but Martin can't even get on the field right now, which raises concerns about whether he's actually going to develop into a reliable starter. So linebacker depth is definitely something the 49ers need to consider, especially if they're running Robert Saleh's defensive scheme that requires intelligent linebackers who can diagnose plays quickly and flow to the ball. Richard Jefferson, who is also on the panel, then brings up safety as a potential sleeper need that people aren't talking about enough. And RJ points out that Malik Mustafa will be going into year 3 of his rookie contract, so he's still relatively young and under team control, but Jair Brown is entering the final year of his rookie deal, which means the 49ers need to either extend him or start planning for his potential departure in free agency. And Jefferson makes this argument that it's never too early to add developmental safety talent through the draft, because that position requires such high football IQ and processing speed that it often takes young players a year or two to really grasp NFL concepts and coverages. So if you draft a safety in 2026 and give him a redshirt-type year learning behind the veteran, by 2027, when Brown potentially leaves, you already have his replacement ready to step in seamlessly, without any drop-off in production or communication on the back end. But here's where the Fox Sports discussion really got into the meat of player evaluation, as they started going through Mel Kiper's big board position by position, identifying specific prospects who make sense for the 49ers' needs and scheme fits. And Colin Cowherd leads off by talking about wide receivers, since that's such a glaring need. And Cowherd starts with Jordan Tyson out of Arizona State, who's 6'2", 200 pounds, from Allen, Texas, which is the same high school that produced Kyler Murray. And Tyson transferred from Colorado, where he played under Deion Sanders, and has really good size for the position. And Cowherd reads Mel Kiper's scouting report on Tyson, which says his superpower is being open even when it looks like he's completely blanketed, which makes him essentially uncoverable in the red zone. He wins on 50-50 balls and outmuscles defensive backs consistently. And Cowherd makes this point that Tyson's 40 time at the Combine is going to determine a lot about where he goes on draft boards, because if he runs in the low 4, free for ears, he could shoot up into that late first-round range. But if he's more of a 4.5 guy, he might slide to day 2, which could make him perfect value for San Francisco in the 2nd or 3rd round. Nick Wright then jumps in, talking about Carnell Tate, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, and Wright makes this observation that while everyone focuses on Jeremiah Smith, who's the obvious star receiver for the Buckeyes, Tate has actually had a really impressive season in his own right, with 44 catches for 793 yards and 8 touchdowns despite dealing with a lower body injury. And Wright reads Kiper's assessment that Tate has produced big plays on a regular basis, averaging 2 yards per catch. He's a precise route runner with great hands and outstanding body control, and perhaps most importantly, for Kyle Shanahan's offense, Tate will happily block for ball carriers, which NFL coaches absolutely love to see from their receivers. And Wright emphasizes that Shanahan has always prioritized receivers who are willing and capable blockers, because so much of his scheme relies on wide zone runs and jet sweeps, where receivers need to seal edges and create running lanes. So a guy like Tate, who has that physical mentality, while also being a legitimate receiving threat, could be incredibly valuable for what San Francisco wants to do offensively. Emmanuel Acho then brings up Makai Lemon from USC as another wide receiver option. And Acho talks about how Lincoln Riley has done a pretty solid job turning that USC program around, even though they haven't won many marquee games this season outside of beating a ranked Illinois team. And Acho cites Lemon's production showing 79 catches for 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns, and then reads Kiper's glowing evaluation, calling Lemon a warrior who plays with passion, saying he'd want Lemon on his roster because he snatches the ball away from his body in an attacking manner and runs with fierce approach after the catch. And Acho mentions that Nick Saban recently said Lehman has been one of the best players he's seen in college football this year, which is incredibly high praise. And Acho makes this comparison to Jackson Smith-Njigba, because Lemon is primarily a slot receiver who wins with route precision and hands rather than elite straight-line speed. So he'd give the 49ers that reliable chain mover from the slot that they've been missing since losing players like Kendrick Bourne years ago. But then Colin Cowherd shifts gears to talk about offensive line prospects, because that's such a critical need for San Francisco's future. And Cowherd starts with Francis Mauigoa, who's an offensive tackle from Miami that some NFL evaluators think might have to move inside to guard at the next level. And Cowherd reads Kiper's assessment, saying Mauigoa is a true mauler who's fun to watch for the way he just destroys pass rushers at the point of attack. He has over 2,300 career snaps at right tackle and has the pass protection skills to potentially stick there. But he could absolutely slide inside and become a Pro Bowl caliber guard, which might actually be his best position long-term. And Cowherd points out that Mauigoa has allowed only 1 sack and blown just 9 run blocks since the start of this season, which are elite-level numbers that indicate exceptional technique and consistency. And given the 49ers' need at left guard, having someone who can come in and start immediately at that position would be incredibly valuable, especially if it allows them to move other pieces around and optimize the entire offensive line configuration. Nick Wright then brings up Kenyon Sade, the tight end out of Oregon, and Wright gets really animated talking about how much he loves this prospect because Sade can legitimately do everything you want from a modern NFL tight end. And Wright describes Sade as 6'3", 245 pounds, with great feet and movement skills. He's physical and can absorb contact. He's a willing and capable blocker who actually enjoys that aspect of the game, and he's a legitimate receiving threat with 40 catches for 490 yards and 8 touchdowns this season, including being a genuine red zone weapon. And Wright reads Kiper's evaluation, saying, Sade is loaded with physical traits. He has the explosion to hurdle defenders in the open field. He has vision and speed to cause conflict after the catch with almost half his yardage coming after reception, and he's nearly impossible to match up against because of his unique combination of quickness and size. And Wright makes this really interesting point that Sade might be everything people hoped Kyle Pitts would become, but more physical and more willing to block. And if the 49ers wanted to run more 2 tight end sets alongside George Kittle to create matchup nightmares, Sade would be the perfect complement, who could eventually be the heir apparent when Kittle's career winds down. But then the discussion shifts to defensive prospects, which is where things got really interesting because the panel started evaluating edge rushers and defensive linemen who fit what Robert Saleh and the 49ers defensive scheme prioritizes. And Emmanuel Acho leads off talking about David Bailey, the outside linebacker from Texas Tech, who's 6'3", 250 pounds. And Acho acknowledges that Bailey might be a little undersized for what San Francisco traditionally likes at defensive end, because they prefer thicker players who can set the edge and play inside on passing down. But Acho argues that with the modern landscape of the NFL, you need pure speed rushers who can get after the quarterback relentlessly. And HO cites Bailey's production showing 36 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, and 62 pressures this season for one of the best teams in the country, and then reads Kuiper's assessment, noting that Bailey transferred from Stanford, where he had 14.5 sacks over 3 years, and has notably become more of a finisher this season, with his 21.5% pressure rate ranking second in the nation. Richard Jefferson then jumps in talking about Caleb Downs, the safety out of Ohio State, and RJ says Downs is legitimately one of his favorite players in this entire draft class because he can make an impact at all 3 levels of the field. And Jefferson describes watching Downs play and seeing him all over the field for Ohio State's defense. He's 6 feet 205 pounds with good size, and he put up 51 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, and 6 run stops, showing he can mix it up around the line of scrimmage while also providing coverage ability on the back end. And RJ reads Kuiper's glowing evaluation, calling Downs basically an extension of the defensive coordinator whose football knowledge shows in his play, noting that Downs is the brother of NFL receiver Josh Downs and son of former NFL running back Gary Downs, so he has tremendous football bloodlines and understanding of the game. And Jefferson makes this point that if Robert Saleh ends up staying with the organization as defensive coordinator, Caleb Downs could be an absolutely perfect fit for his scheme because Saleh values those intelligent, rangy safeties who can process information quickly and play multiple roles depending on game situation. Colin Cowherd then brings up Peter Woods, the interior defensive lineman from Clemson, and Cowherd acknowledges that producer Chip, who went to Clemson, has been talking about Woods and mentioned he's had a bit of a down year in 2025 compared to previous season. And Cowherd reads Kuiper's assessment, echoing that sentiment, saying Woods hasn't been elite in 2025, but the skill set is exactly what NFL teams covet. He just needs to finish strong over the second half of the season. And Cowherd explains that Woods at 6'3", 310 pounds would fit nicely at 3-technique defensive tackle. Though he has the versatility to move around the defensive front, he plays on the inside the majority of time, but can also be disruptive off the edge, and his strength will intrigue NFL teams regardless of where he lines up. And Cowherd makes this observation that the 49ers have historically valued positional versatility from their defensive linemen because it allows them to create favorable matchups and rotate fresh bodies without significantly changing their defensive structure. So a player like Woods, who can capably play multiple spots along the line, could be really valuable even if his 2025 tape isn't quite as impressive as previous years. Nick Wright then talks about Spencer Fano, the offensive tackle from Utah, and Wright mentions that a viewer had asked about this player specifically, which shows how engaged the 49ers fan base is with draft evaluation. And Wright describes Fano as 6'6", 308 pounds, from Spanish Fork, Utah, who stayed in-state to play his college ball. And he's had 11 starts this year with 0 sacks allowed, which is obviously an impressive statistic for any offensive tackle. And Wright reads Kuiper's assessment, noting that Fano started 12 games at left tackle in 2023 before moving to right tackle in 2024. So he has experience and proven competence on both sides. He does a great job keeping his big frame between pass rushers and the quarterback. He's technically sound and shows good punch to compensate for his lack of ideal arm length. And Wright makes this comparison to Mike McGlinchey in terms of build, saying Fano is similarly slender for an offensive tackle and could probably stand to bulk up a bit. But that tackle versatility, where he can play either left or right side, is incredibly valuable because it gives coaching staffs options and allows you to potentially move pieces around if injuries strike, or if you want to optimize matchups against specific defensive fronts. But then, Emmanuel Acho gets really excited talking about Ruben Bain Jr., the edge rusher from Miami. And Acho emphasizes that from a size standpoint, Bain would absolutely fit what the 49ers traditionally look for at defensive end, because he's bigger than those slight 245, 250-pound speed rushers. And Acho describes Bain as 6'3", 270 pounds with 35 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and 45 pressures this season, and then reads this absolutely glowing scouting report from Mel Kiper that honestly sounds like it was written specifically describing the prototypical 49ers defensive end. And HO reads how Bain is powerful with really strong hands similar to Mike Williams. He routinely gets the best of very good offensive tackles, often with his dominant rip move, and knows every trick in the book for getting home to the quarterback. And unlike some power rushers, Bain also shows speed and bend off the edge with good angle. And here's the part that really got Acho fired up. Kiper writes that Bain can hold the edge against the run and get off blocks to chase down ball carriers. His tape is filled with disruption. But what really stands out is his hustle, because he never takes a play off and fires at the ball on every snap. And Acho practically shouts that this literally sounds like a prototypical Chris Kukurek, Robert Saleh, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan type of defensive end, exactly the kind of motor and mentality that 49ers coaching staff has always valued above even pure athletic measurables. Richard Jefferson then brings up Vega Ioannidis, the interior offensive lineman from Penn State, and RJ acknowledges that Penn State hasn't had a great season, and their head coaching search has been an unmitigated disaster, with them still being without a head coach, even after National Signing Day. But Jefferson emphasizes they still have a bunch of NFL-caliber players on that roster, and Ioannidis, at 6'4", 328 pounds, is an absolute mauler at guard with 10 starts and 0 sacks allowed this season. And RJ reads Kiper's assessment, saying Ioannidis drives defensive tackles off the ball, sustains his blocks well, can get to the second level and torque defenders out of the way, and he's incredibly agile at left guard for his side. And Jefferson points out that Ioannidis has 31 career starts and has given up only 2 sacks over that entire span, with both coming in 2023, which means in 2024 and 2025, he's been essentially perfect in pass protection. And RJ makes this point that if the 49ers are looking for a plug-and-play left guard who can step in immediately and provide quality starter-level performance, Ioannidis represents exactly that type of safe floor prospect who might not have superstar upside, but has such a high baseline of competence that you know exactly what you're getting. Colin Cowherd then talks about Hakeem Messidou, another defensive lineman from Miami. And Cowherd points out this is yet another Miami player on the list, which speaks to how well Mario Cristobal has recruited and developed talent there. And Cowherd describes Messidou as 6'3", 265 pounds, with 46 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, and 37 pressures, showing highly productive numbers. And reads Kiper's background, noting Messidou started at West Virginia in 2020 and 2021, racking up 5 sacks, transferred to Miami, and had 7 sacks in his first year there, got limited to 3 games in 2023 due to injury, but came back with 5.5 more sacks in 2024. And Cowherd reads that the Canadian native makes his presence felt against both run and pass, shows good bend and closing burst in power when his initial move is thwarted, never stops battling, and brings versatility with ability to shade inside to defensive tackle and get pressure on the interior. And Cowherd just flatly states, this guy sounds like a Niner. Everything about his game and mentality screams San Francisco 49ers defensive lineman. Nick Wright then brings up Kendrick Falk, the defensive end out of Auburn, and Wright gets really animated about this prospect's physical profile because Falk is genuinely massive at 6'6", 285 pounds from the defensive end spot. And Wright reads Mel Kiper's evaluation that if you could draw up the perfect NFL 4-3 defensive end, it would be Kendrick Falk, calling him an LTP guy, meaning he looks the part, he can win with both outside and inside moves, and moves blockers with his super powerful hands, shows good overall instincts on tape, makes his presence felt against both run and pass, and is scheme versatile. And Wright mentions that Kiper specifically calls attention to Falk's wingspan in the background photo describing it as stupid athleticism. And Wright makes this point that when you combine that kind of elite length and size with the technical refinement and motor that Falk shows on tape, you're looking at a potential top 20 pick who could be a cornerstone defensive end for a decade if he continues developing and stays healthy. But then the discussion shifts to defensive backs, because as Emmanuel Acho points out, this is shaping up to be a pretty strong DB class, and Acho starts by talking about Mansour Delane, the cornerback from LSU, who's ranked 22nd on Kiper's big board. And Acho describes Delane as 6 feet 190 pounds, from Silver Spring, Maryland, with 43 tackles, 11 passes defended, and 2 interceptions this season. And Acho emphasizes that the 49ers historically love college corners who have a proven track record of making plays on the football, rather than just being pure cover guys who rarely see targets. And Acho reads Kiper's evaluation, saying he's been very impressed with the instincts and savviness Delane shows in coverage, calling him a true technician who's demonstrated excellent ball skills with 26 pass breakups and 8 interceptions over his 4-year career, noting he excels in both man and zone coverage, and is allowing only 3.4 yards per attempt on throws in his direction, which ranks 10th nationally. And Acho makes this point that even though corner might not be the 49ers' most pressing need, given they have some established starters, you can never have too many good corners in today's NFL, where every team is throwing the ball 60% of the time. So adding a high-quality prospect like Delane, who could contribute immediately in nickel packages while developing into a potential starter, would make a lot of sense. Richard Jefferson closes out the segment by talking about Omari Washington, the defensive lineman from Oregon, and RJ mentions that the 49ers make it a point to attend Oregon Pro Days regularly because of the regional ties and proximity. And Jefferson describes Washington as 6'3", 330 pounds, from the interior defensive line with 30 tackles, 5 passes defended, which is impressive for an interior lineman, 4 tackles for loss, 1 sack, and 5 run stops this season. And RJ reads Kiper's assessment that Washington is putting it all together. He's powerful, quick, and explosive, tough as nails, and teams are going to be interested in that combination, even though his game is still somewhat raw, with no career starts before this season. And Jefferson explains that Washington can clog up the middle against the run, can power through with his bull rush to get interior pressure, and is very difficult to contain at the point of attack, though Kiper notes he's still developing and could continue rising up boards before April. And RJ makes this final point that while the rawness is obviously a concern because you're never quite sure how quickly developmental prospects will put it all together at the NFL level, sometimes those high-upside interior defensive linemen with elite physical traits are worth betting on in the 2nd or 3rd round. Because if they do figure it out, you've got a Pro Bowl caliber player on a rookie contract for 4 years, which is incredible value. What really struck me watching this entire Fox Sports segment was how thorough and position-specific the panel was in evaluating potential draft targets for the 49ers, rather than just doing generic big board ranking, because they actually thought through San Francisco's specific scheme requirements and roster needs at each position, while also considering contract situations and aging curves of current starters. And I think the overarching theme was that the 49ers are at this interesting inflection point where they're still absolutely in championship contention mode for the next 2 or 3 years with their current core, but they also need to start thinking intelligently about succession planning and adding young talent that can eventually replace aging veterans like Trent Williams and potentially George Kittle and Deebo Samuel as those players move into the twilight of their careers. So using the 2026 draft to address both immediate depth needs and longer-term positional planning is absolutely critical for maintaining sustained excellence rather than having everything collapse once this current window closes.